Alrighty, I think we'll get started here. Again, appreciate y'all coming in on this cold, windy evening. Just get things going off here. Again, I will have a time of questions at the end, and so if you would like to be pondering those as we go through, that would be good. Get geared up. So again, just want to give credit real quick to Dave Nutting, the founder of Alpha Omega Institute, which I attended that institute for a year as a creation science training program and gained a lot of the material and pretty much all the slides from them. And also learned under Brian Mariani, who worked there as well. So definitely want to give them credit for this and the training that received. So again, we're kind of looking at nature or what we see around us and say, did it come about through blind chance and accident, or is there design? Because again, dominating thought in the area of science is Darwinian evolution, the idea of basically going from goo to you by way of the zoo, or basically going from molecules to life by chance and accident, just slow stages, randomly, mutation, natural selection, no intelligent design forethought going into it. It all just happened accidentally over millions of years. And so with that, we just had to think, well, if we were walking along a path and we found these lying on the ground at maybe the base of a mountain, we'd pick them up and say, wow, I wonder how they tumbled down the mountain and nicked themselves and were stepped on by deer to create this wonderful shape that we see. And we'd say, well, does that make sense? What about if we said, oh, look what this explosion at a paint factory produced, this on this canvas? Or has anyone been to Mount Rushmore? If you go to Mount Rushmore, do you ever look at that and say, wow, look what lightning and ice and rain and wind produced on the side of that mountain? Well, no, we would look at these things and we would say, this doesn't seem to be the produce of chance and accident, but that we can look at something and say there clearly seems to be some level of design, even if we never saw who designed it or who made it. We can look at it and say there seems to be some forethought, something that intelligent that had to make this. But again, according to Darwinian evolution, it can happen accidentally, and time is really the magic in the mix. As George Wald says, time is in fact the hero of the plot in regard to evolution. The time with which we have to deal with is the order of 2 billion years. What we regard as impossible on the basis of human experience is meaningless here. Given so much time, the impossible becomes possible, the possible probable, and the probable virtually certain. One only has to wait. Time itself performs the miracles. Rather interesting that he uses that term miracle, because we know that nature does not produce miracles. But let's just say that we take that experience, we say, all right, let's have all the building materials for a house. We have all the boards, the nails, the drywall, the plumbing, the electrical, and we lay it out in a field, and we say, all right, we're going to step away and let nature and natural accidents take their course. And in 100 years, we come back, and there's a house. Wow, isn't that amazing? No? Okay, maybe we need to wait longer. Let's wait 1 million years? 1 billion years? And are we going to get a house? No, we're not. Well, again, according to evolution, they say, well, what you need is random energy. Okay, let's add random energy to the mix. And once we light it and that energy goes off, do we have a house? No, we don't have a house. Instead, we have chaos, disorder, destruction, when there's random energy and chance and accident. So we, again, applying what we observe in life, we know that things don't build themselves. And not only that, things aren't getting better naturally. If you build a wonderful grand barn and then you step away from it saying, I'm not going to intervene whatsoever, I'm going to let nature take its course, is the barn going to get bigger? Is it going to get better? No, it's going to get dilapidated. It's going to break down unless you intervene to stop that decay from happening. It's interesting that Scripture says in Hebrews 3:4, every house is built by someone, but he who built all things is God. So let's maybe look at nature and see, is there evidence that God built what we see, or that he intervened and he made it to function in a certain way? Or is it possibly the chance of accident slowly building upon itself? What's this a picture of? It's a zoomed in picture. This is actually the picture of a spider spinneret. A spider web is not just one thread, but actually it spins multiple threads into its string. and that makes it very strong. What a complex design, or sorry, accident. And what about the spider web itself? Spider web silk is 5 times stronger than steel. That is to say, if you had a steel beam and you were able to strand spider web the thickness of that same beam, the spider web would be 5 times stronger than that steel beam. And it's also twice as elastic as nylon, yet it remains completely waterproof. What an interesting thing. How did that happen accidentally? Who here has chickens? Anybody? Can you answer the question then? Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, of course, evolutionists may look at this and say, well, the egg seems to be the simpler thing, and according to evolution, you go from simpler to more complex. But is that egg really so simple? If we look at it, if you ever boiled an egg, you'll see little bubbles coming out of the egg. Why is that? Because there's air. The eggshell is porous and has little holes in it, because as the chick is developing, it needs to take in oxygen. And it actually is able to take in oxygen through those pores. But sadly, a few days before it's about to hatch, it's not getting enough oxygen. It's going to die. But as you sometimes crack open an egg and look, you'll see a little air pocket on the side. And that's very important that the chick is able to pop that air pocket and receive vital oxygen that it needs a few days before it's going to hatch. But what it also needs, the chick can't be able to break out of its shell because it's so confined that it needs what's called an egg tooth that it has on the top of its beak when it's first born. And it uses that egg tooth to be able to break out of the shell. Without it, it would not be able to. So we look at this and we say, okay, if evolution is small processes, things building upon themselves, which came first? The shell pores, the air space, the egg tooth? They're all needed in order for that chick to pop out and be alive. And so we ask, how did that evolve? How did it accidentally slowly get to the point to where you can get a chick being born? How many millions of years did they die and keep dying? How's that going to produce anything? What about hummingbirds? Hummingbirds are beautiful. They're amazing creatures. And you know, hummingbirds don't have very much body fat. And they burn so much energy because they're working so hard, they're not able to retain as much, and so they're having to take in constantly food. And if we compared the hummingbird, their metabolism, compared to ours, what would we take if we were having to consume as much as they did? We would have to consume over 1,000 hamburgers a day, or 150,000 calories a day to be able to keep up our energy source. We'd have to consume 60 liters of water. Our heart would beat 500 to 1,200 times a minute. And because of how much friction we're working hard, our body heat would go over 500 degrees Fahrenheit. So basically, we would burst into flames. And yet the hummingbird, so wonderfully designed. And not only that, but even the hummingbird, because again, it's expelling so much energy, its heart rate is going so fast, that actually if it were to try to fall asleep and its heart rate was still going as fast as normal, it would die and run out of energy. So it actually enters into a state called torpor at night, where it actually slows down its heart rate to conserve energy. Not from 500 to 300, or even to 100, but all the way down to 50 beats per minute. What a drastic change that is. That would be like us with an average of 60 beats per minute going down to 6. So that's ba-bum. Ba-bum. 6 beats every 10 seconds. We wouldn't survive. We would die. And yet, how did the hummingbird know how to be able to slow down its heart that rapidly or that significantly, and then how to bring it back up to normal once it awoke? An amazing accident, according to evolution. What about the woodpecker? Woodpecker may be a nuisance to some, but the woodpecker is actually also a very interesting creature to look at, because the woodpecker kind of stands out among other birds. First of all, if you notice, most birds have 3 claws on the front and 1 on the back. But the woodpecker has 2 on the front and 2 on the back. And that allows it to get good grip against that tree that it's about to peck at. Also, its tail feathers are much stronger than other birds because it actually pushes down with its back tail feathers, making itself like a tripod, getting ready to strike at that tree. And it strikes at that tree really fast, doesn't it? Up to 20 times per second. Brr, brr. You can hear it. So fast. And how hard is he hitting that tree? He's hitting that tree up to 1,000 times the force of gravity. That'd be like you driving a car 150 miles per hour into a giant redwood tree. That's how much force that he's hitting this tree with. Well, if that's true, then why doesn't his beak fold up like an accordion? Why doesn't his eyes pop out of his head or his brain turn into jello? Why not? Well, part of the reason, there's many features, but it has this amazing spongy tissue between its beak and its skull that acts like a shock absorber, absorbing so much of that force to protect the rest of its skull. And not only that, but it also has an ability to be able to keep its eyes in while it is pecking at the tree. Again, a beautifully designed creature that we would say it's almost like a machine able to function so well at what it is doing. Not only that, but the woodpecker also has other interesting features as well. Why is the woodpecker even pecking against that tree? Well, he's trying to get the insect that's inside that tree, is he not? Well, let's say that you're that insect and someone's breaking down the front of your door. What are you going to do? You're just going to keep standing there? You're going to go to the door and answer it? No, you're going to run away through your exit. And so the same, as the woodpecker is pecking at the tree, the insect is running away, is he not, down his pathways that he's drilled. So what woodpeckers have is a really long tongue that they're able to try to get that insect as it's running away. And if you were to continue this picture, the tongue would actually go down, almost touching to the floor. It can be 3 times the length of their beak. Well, with this long tongue, how does the woodpecker store this long tongue? Does he just roll it up and keep it inside his mouth? Does he just let it flop around while he's woodpecking? No, actually he has special ability to wrap his tongue in around between his skull and his skin, up and through his beak. What an amazing storage ability. But again, if we continue that idea of it's chasing now with its tongue, it's chasing that insect, well, how big of a hole do insects tend to bore into the tree? Well, just about enough for the insect to get through, right? So here comes this tongue, and he now gets to the worm or insect. What's he going to do? He can't get around it. Is he just going to poke it and say, hey, come here, I want to eat you? Well, no. Well, they actually have a sticky glue on the end of their tongue that they're able to stick that insect with and reel it into their mouth. But now there's a problem, is there not? He has this food stuck to the end of his tongue. What's he going to do, swallow his tongue? Well, no, he has special enzymes inside his saliva and his beak that when he brings that glue end into his saliva, it releases the glue, allowing him then to consume his food. And so again, we look at the woodpecker and we say, well, which came first? The long tongue, the storage compartment for the long tongue, the glue on the end, the saliva inside the beak? Which came first? No, they all have to be there in order for the woodpecker to function properly. And it seems like it was created that way. And I can give you another situation. So we have this toad, and along comes this beetle. And that toad's like, oh man, I'm going to get that beetle. And sure enough, he stretches out his tongue, and he's about to eat that beetle. Oh, he thinks it's going to be so yummy. But then something happens. The beetle's walking away just fine, and the toad is in distress. What happened? Well, he didn't realize that what he was about to eat was the bombardier beetle. The bombardier beetle is able to shoot out an explosive gas out of its backside. It's an amazing creature that if you were to actually turn out the lights and watch the bombardier beetle, or look at the bombardier beetle as it shoots off its gas, you'll actually see a flash of light. This is truly the first flamethrower in nature. And so we ask ourselves, how did this creature come about accidentally? Was he just in the laboratory for millions of years saying, let me add these random explosive materials together? Well, no, then we would have these beetles exploding all over the place, dying because they're not getting it right. They're just throwing random chemicals together. But no, instead we look at the bombardier beetle and we say, it looks like it was designed to function that way. How could that come about accidentally? Let's go under the water. What is this? Well, according to Nemo, this is an anemone. Anemone. And some anemones, as we learned, have an ability to shock fish that swim by and eat them. But there's other ones that also have these little missiles that shoot out of the end of their tentacles, that when a fish is coming by or brushes by, a little trap door opens and shoots out this barb that stabs them and paralyzes them, so then the anemone can then eat that fish. But there's actually something that eats that anemone, and that is a sea slug. And this might be a little bit of a dramatic picture of a sea slug eating the anemone, but actually when the sea slug eats the anemone, those missiles do not go off. And in fact, not only do those missiles not go off, but they don't just pass through the sea slug and are lost. The sea slug is actually able to take those missiles and send them through to the end of his tentacles and actually be able to use them to shoot at fish that swim by. So as my professor would say, this is the first creature to ever be able to pirate another creature's missile system. This is amazing. How did this creature come about accidentally? How does that evolve through random chance and accident? Again, it's rather ironic that we look at nature and some people will say, oh, well, it's not designed. But you know that we've actually taken things from nature to design things for ourselves? Such as the cocklebur. The cocklebur has these little hooks on the ends that snag onto fur and clothing. And someone took that and they said, let's make something like that. And that's where we get Velcro from. Velcro came from inspired by the cocklebur and its little hook systems, how it's able to hook onto certain material. What about boxfish? Boxfish are able to swim very quickly through water. And some people thought, oh, let's take those aerodynamics and let's apply them to a vehicle. And again, looking at the boxfish and trying to see how can we mimic what we see in the boxfish, but the boxfish wasn't designed, but we'll design a car after the accidental boxfish. What about sharks? Sharks are a very interesting creature. They can also swim pretty quickly through the water. And you know that mankind has also looked at the skin of the shark fish, and they see these interesting interconnections of these plates on the skin of the shark, and they've actually made a special swimsuit called Fast Skin. And actually in 2000, 83% of medal winners wore the shark skin swimsuit. And in 2007, half of the world's swimming records have been broken by competitors wearing that shark skin swimsuit, which again was designed after sharks, but sharks were not designed after a creator supposedly. Rather interesting. And actually there's more to shark skin as well. Because sometimes whenever you look at whales, what do you see on whales as mouths and fins at times? Barnacles that are growing on them. But you look at the shark, why aren't there any barnacles growing on the shark? Well, again, the skin of the shark have these certain ridges that the barnacle is not able to grow on. So people have decided, oh, let's maybe take that because look what's happening to our ships. We're getting these barnacles growing on our ships, which weigh us down, slow us down. So let's make this paint, shark skin paint, that we're able to put on our ships and be able to create these ridges to try to prevent the barnacles from growing on our ships. And not only that, but again, the shark skin has certain abilities to also repel certain microbes. And again, they've tried to use that material on things such as medical supplies and even binkies as, again, a way to expel microbes who are not able to grab on to that certain structure. Again, here we are designing things after the shark, but we would say, oh, the shark happened by accident, by chance. Rather interesting. What's this a picture of? No, it's not. It's not asparagus. Let's zoom out a little more. What's that? That is the foot of a gecko. Geckos are very amazing creatures. They can run up walls and even on ceilings. Even if the ceiling was made of glass, they can run along that. How can they do that? Well, it's because these tiny little ends of on their feet are actually able to make molecular bonds onto the structure that they're walking along. So they connect and grab on molecularly, and then as they move, they can disconnect and keep going very rapidly. And again, mankind has looked at that and said, can we create something like that? And again, something similar we've created, and it's this new adhesive. And they've actually been able to make gloves out of this adhesive so that man can become Spider-Man. And you can use these adhesive gloves to be able to climb buildings and skyscrapers. But before you go out and try to buy a pair, I'll let you know that it's about $6,000 per square inch to get this adhesive. So it might cost you a pretty penny to become Spider-Man. But again, trying to mimic what is seen in nature, yet ironically we would say that what happened in nature was accidental. But again, I would say that it seems obvious that some type of intelligent designer put thought into these things first, and then we are borrowing from them, and usually not to the effect or to as good as what we are seeing in nature. But even then, we don't really have to see far in nature to see design. You can look to yourself. especially your eyes. Do you know how amazing your eyes are? Very complex, very sophisticated. You have this crystal clear cornea on the tip, and you have these lenses that are able to focus in on stuff that are far and that are close very rapidly. And you also even have your own windshield wiper, your eyelid, and even your own window washing fluid, your tear ducts, that in case you get something in your eye that won't come out, that help wash it out. And your iris is able to adjust. It gets smaller and bigger to let in certain light. It's its own form of sunglasses. And you have in the back of your eye these photoreceptors, 137 million of them per square inch in the back to receive the image and then to send it through your optic nerve all the way to your brain to tell you what are you looking at. An amazing thing that the human eye is. No camera in the world can actually do everything that your eye can. Yes, it can do some things very well, but it cannot do all of the things that your eye can. It is very amazing. And again, some will say, oh, well, but mankind is like on the very end of the evolutionary ladder, so of course it would be sophisticated for man. Well, even for squids, they have similar eyes, which again, squids were supposedly around hundreds of millions of years ago. And yet we look at them and they also have very sophisticated eyes. Where did they get those from? Supposedly through chance and accident. Doesn't seem to make sense. Even Darwin himself said, to this day, the eye makes me shudder. Why does it make Charles Darwin shudder? Because he looks at it and he says, it looks planned. It's so complexly interrelated, all these parts, that if you were to remove one or two parts, now the eye is useless. It can't see, it can't function. How did it come about? Accidentally, slowly, pieces slowly building upon themselves. Think about a computer. Computers are pretty sophisticated, aren't they? But they're not even close to the ability that your brain is able to do. Your brain is super complex. It has 12 billion cells, over 100 trillion connections within the human brain. And it's ironic, again, that we look at the human brain and we say, oh, it came out by chance and accident, yet there's still so many things about the human brain that we don't understand, that are baffling scientists. We're still trying to understand things about how the human brain functions. And here in this book, someone who looked at it carefully said that the total number of synapses, those are the connections, interconnections within your brain, is roughly equal to the number of stars in how many Milky Way galaxies? 1,500. So we have our Milky Way galaxy and all the stars that are in it. Multiply that by 1,500, all those stars, and that's how many connections that you have in your brain. A single human brain has more switches than all the computers and routers and internet connections on Earth. That is a very sophisticated organ that you have. And supposedly it accidentally came about that way. Doesn't seem to make sense. How many of you have gotten cut and bled before? Why didn't you bleed to death? Because you actually have a blood clotting system within your body that tries to release fibrinogen, among other things, that creates a web to stop blood cells from coming through so you don't just keep bleeding forever. And there's a lot of other things that take place in order for the blood clotting system to work. Because what if you just had fibrinogen randomly releasing in your body? Well, it would start cutting off blood flow in all random parts of your body and you would die. So it needs to be able to know when to release, how much to release, where to release, and then when to stop. So many factors are in play for the blood clotting system. So many so that even some names are the Christmas factor, because they were running out of names of how many different connections it takes for the blood clotting system to work. So again, we ask, how many creatures bled to death until they got it right? How many creatures had their arteries stopped because they had too much fibrinogen in them? No, it doesn't seem like this could have happened slowly. All these parts have to be working perfectly or else the creature dies. And again, how it's able to also, the fibrinogen to go away at the time that your cut heals so the blood flow can be maintained. Again, so many things about you, about your body that are so amazing, so wonderful. And we ask again, how did all that come about supposedly through millions of years of random chance and accident? And let's look maybe at one more, just the human cell also. Again, we have to give maybe some leniency to Charles Darwin, that for him and fellow scientists back in the mid-1800s, they try to look at the cell through a microscope and they would just see a white blob. They thought, oh, it's just a blob of protoplasm. It's not something very sophisticated. But of course, nowadays, we realize that there is so much in the human cell, that there is definitely great complexity within it. But again, according to evolution, you have to go from molecules, non-life, to the first cell, life. That has to be the process without any designer or intelligent person interfering with that process according to evolution. So how would that take place? Again, they'd say, well, it's something probably like you'd see at Yellowstone, just a boiling hot pool of random chemicals, and then maybe lightning is striking it randomly. And again, the hero of the plot supposedly is time, so you just wait long enough and it'll just randomly happen. So whenever you hear that someone says life originated from non-life, there's an important question you should ask. What's the evidence? Well, indeed, here you go, in 1992. The first living cells emerged between 4 billion and 3.8 billion years ago. There is no record of the event. Oh, that's 1992. Surely we've gotten better. Let's do 1998, Encyclopedia. Both the origin of life and the origin of major groups of animals remain unknown. Oh, let's go a little further. Let's go to 2004. Nobody knows how a mixture of lifeless chemicals spontaneously organize themselves into the first living cell. Oh, that's interesting. So again, we look at the human cell and we say, wow, it is so complex, so amazing. How did this come about by chance and accident? Maybe what's even the probability that that could happen? Because again, there's just so much going on, that so much parts that have to be in connection with each other, knowing what to produce, how to go in, how to go out of the cell, what are they taking in, what are they taking out. It's like a huge factory, which actually the agnostic Michael Denton said in his book, that if we could shrink ourselves down to the point where we could enter into a cell, we would find ourselves in a world of supreme technology and bewildering complexity beyond our own creative capacities. Now again, some people will say, well, that's again our human cell now, but back then, it's a very simple cell. Like maybe let's look at bacteria, single-celled creature like bacteria. And we say, well, is even a single-cell bacteria simple? I mean, even if you start breaking down an example of one, it still has a lot of features inside of it that allow it to function. Let's maybe even look at its tail, called the flagellum. Is that a simple structure? Well, no, look, it's got a rotator, it's got bushings, it's got a hook. That seems very sophisticated. Even here, a more detailed diagram. It's got rings, it's got caps, it's got a body, it's got all these things that need to function. Really, it really looks like a motor that really has to be there in order for this tail, this flagellum, to function. How did that motor come about accidentally? What if you take a piece off of that motor? Well, now it's not going to work. Now that bacteria is not going to be able to move around. Here's evolutionist Dr. David Plastead, who is a PhD and professor of computer science. He says, biologists are hypothesizing some RNA-based life form that might have had a smaller genome and might have given rise to a cell with about 250 genes. Again, they're trying to see maybe it was a simpler, smaller cell. Until this is demonstrated, one would have to say that the problem of abiogenesis, which is life from non-life, is very severe indeed for the theory of evolution. Again, they don't have any evidence for how life comes from non-life. And even some scientists, an agnostic and an atheist, got together and they decided, let's figure out what's the probability of a cell coming about by chance and accident, even a simple cell. And you know what their probability was? 1 chance in 10 to the 40,000th power. Now what's that? Well, that's 10 with 40,000 zeros after it. I wonder how many zeros until we realize it's impossible. You know what they said? They actually said that it was more likely for a tornado to go through a junkyard and produce a Boeing 747 fueled and ready to go. Again, we would say, that's impossible. There's no way that would happen no matter how many billions of years you have tornadoes going through junkyards. It's not going to produce that. That's not possible. And so here was their conclusion. There must be a God. But sadly, although the headline says that, the two scientists did not fully commit to that, and they decided no. Instead, there were some aliens that came and they must have planted that first cell on Earth. But even if supposedly the first cell did come from aliens, that doesn't solve the problem of where life came from, did it? Because now we don't know where those aliens came from. How did they evolve? Where did their life come from? That doesn't solve any problems. That just pushes the question further back. Here's Sir Francis Crick, evolutionist, that says, an honest man armed with all the knowledge available to us now could only state that in some sense the origin of life appears to be at the moment appears to be almost a miracle. So many are the conditions which would have had to have been satisfied to get it going. And again, we've looked at stuff in nature, and we've looked even at ourselves, and we just say there's so much complexity, so much design. Surely there had to have been forethought, something that went into these creatures being this way, or else how could they have supposedly accidentally arisen? And again, we use logic and we say, we look at these things, do these things accidentally come together? And then we also look, of course, then to nature and we say, well, did these things then, that are even more complex than a house or a plane, did these things come about by accident or by design? For the scriptures declare in Romans 1:20, since the creation of the world, God's invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that mankind is without excuse. We look at nature and we see that it points to a designer, it points to a creator. But again, there are those who will turn away from that, such as Sir Arthur Keith, which says evolution is unproved and unprovable. We believe it because the only alternative is special creation, and that is unthinkable. So again, they admit themselves that evolution can't be proven, though ironically it's taught as fact in school, because no one was there to observe it, right? Science is observation and experimentation. No one observed the supposed first life being made, and no one can recreate that situation. So they even admit that it is unprovable. Yet again, they say we are going to believe that because otherwise we would have to believe that there is a creator, and we will not accept that. So it's really, yes, evolution requires faith, and so does creationism. We didn't see God make everything, but thankfully we at least have an eyewitness account, whereas evolutionists really have no evidence whatsoever. And it's really a battle of worldviews. And again, these worldviews actually have a lot of consequences at stake, really some hostility, sadly, that can arise, such as what Paul Brandwing said, any child who believes in God is mentally ill. Well, that seems very harmful. Teaching creationism is child abuse. That's a physicist. And here's even Bill Nye, the science guy, saying creationism is not appropriate for children. And again, we can see not only is there perhaps this hostility that's building, but even how mankind is supposed to view themselves. Here's Neil Bell, who says, the fact is, we humans are just as much animals as any worm, toad, or pig. Which again, if that's being taught to our children, or to the next generation, how are they going to view themselves? How are they going to view their fellow person? Why should they treat their fellow person any different than they're treating a toad or a worm or a pig? If we're all just animals, where's even the foundation for morality, for justice? So again, I think that scripture really supports what we see in the world. The evidence that we see around us truly does point to design, to an intelligent creator who had forethought and invested in his creation in an amazing way. And indeed, the scriptures say, I praise thee because I have been fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous is thy workmanship, as my soul is well aware. And something like that, we can see value in the human life. We can see a basis for morality. If this is true, that we are wonderfully made by someone and valued and cared for, that is something that is worth teaching to others. Thank you for your time. Are there any questions that you have? I know I threw a lot at you.